Radiation is something that we are all exposed to in our everyday lives. Things like smoke detectors, Wi Fi, phones, bananas, etc., all contain low levels of radiation. What if I told you that you had to lick a banana that was extremely radioactive over 1,000 times a day? Well, this situation actually happened in history, except it wasn't a banana and was instead a paintbrush that was dipped in radium. Today, I'm going to be talking about the story of the Radium Girls. This moment in history had a movie and plays made about it. However, a lot of people haven't heard anything about it, even though it's gotten exposure over the years. It's had lasting impacts that affect us to this day, and I believe more people need to hear the story. It started in 1898 when Marie Curie and Pierre Curie, two French physicists, discovered a chemical element called radium. Marie Curie had experienced radiation burns from repeatedly handling radium and was well aware of the dangers that radium possessed, but yet she carried bottles that had radium in them and kept them in her pockets at all times and even slept with the radium because she liked the way it glowed in the dark. In 1910, and every single commercial company took it to use in their products. It was used as an ingredient in products such as food, cosmetics, toothpaste, hair cream, elixirs, glassware, etc. Radium was even used in a treatment for cancer and was successful. It was thought to be a miracle ingredient and only had positive benefits such as anti-aging and rejuvenation. Watch and dial companies even began to use radium to have dials glow in the dark to help men tell the time at night and not alert the enemy in war, as it was 1917 during World War I. The USRC had hired 70 women to handle radium and perform other tasks because scientists were well aware of how dangerous it was and refused to go near it. When chemists were dealing with radium, they used masks, lead screens, and tongs to protect themselves. However, it didn't keep them all safe, as multiple deaths had occurred, including the USRC's chief chemist, Dr. Edwin E. Lehman, and of course, the female workers who helped them out. Despite the knowledge of the effects of radium, the USRC hired female workers to paint the dials with radium paint. They hired around 4,000 female workers because they believed women would be able to paint details better since their hands are smaller and daintier. They were given a camel hair brush and a crucible to mix their own paint in. To keep the point of the brush sharp and correct the shape after a few strokes, they were told to use their lips or tongue to reshape it, causing them to ingest radium. They were paid around $1.50 per watch dial, which is equivalent to about 37 cents in today's money, and on average, each woman painted around 250 watch dials a day, earning them $3.75 or $92.04. The dust of the radium would get on their clothes throughout the workday, so some women would wear their favorite dresses to work so their clothes would glow when they went dancing after work. Some women even painted their nails, their faces as if it was makeup, and teeth, earning the name Ghost Girls, since you would see them glowing in the dark on their walk home or to the dance hall. The first person to experience radium poisoning was Amelia Molly Magia. It had begun with a toothache, so she went to the dentist to have it extracted. Not long after, the tooth next to it began to hurt as well, so she went back to have that tooth extracted. Pus, ulcers, and blood had replaced the extraction site, and the poisoning began to spread throughout her mouth, to her lower jaw, and other parts of her body. One day, when her dentist was working on her jawbone, he gently worked on her lower jaw inside her mouth when it completely broke and separated from her skull. He recorded that he didn't need to do anything to remove it, other than merely grabbing it by his fingers and lifting it from her mouth. Only a few days later, the last of her lower jaw was removed. And I'm going to include a picture here, but it is very graphic, so please be advised that it is gross. I am sorry in advance. I'll tell you when it's off screen. Okay, we're good. Eventually, the infection spread to the tissue of her throat and managed to eat its way through her jugular vein, causing her to hemorrhage and her mouth filling with blood. It happened so quickly that her nurse could do nothing to stop the bleeding, and unfortunately, on September 12th, 1922, Amelia Magia had died, and she became the first painter to die. To dismiss her death, it was written on her death certificate that the cause of death was syphilis. They did this because the USRC and other companies did not want any information to get out. So instead of writing down their true cause of death, they decided to use syphilis as an excuse. They also wanted to stop other women from speaking out and discrediting them, since syphilis is an STD and it is the early 1900s. Dentists had seen multiple women come into their offices with toothaches, ulcers, lesions, loose teeth, and the inability for their mouths to heal after having teeth removed. Women were also starting to develop bone fractures, anemia, necrosis in their jaw, which is known now as radium jaw, and necrosis is the death of cells in tissue by the cell's enzymes killing them. menstruation issues, and fertility issues. Their issues were said to be caused by X-rays. However, the level of radiation that they were receiving from X-rays is nowhere near the amount that they absorbed from working with radium. Workers tried to seek help, as some of them were even beginning to develop cancer. So industrial toxicologist and Columbia University specialist who was in contract with the USCR, Frederick Flynn, was sent to investigate. He said that it was because they lacked medical training and the license to practice. There was a study performed that showed a link between the women's health issues and radium. To erase these claims, an investigation was ordered to completely contradict and disprove the link so that women would continue painting the watches and dials without questioning their safety. By 1924, 50 women were ill and 12 had died. Most women who were dying were in their 20s or 30s, their lives being cut short by a money-hungry corporation willing to risk the lives of women if it meant lining their pockets. The 16th known victim to be taken by radium poisoning was Dr. Sabin Arnold von Schotschke, the inventor of radium dial paint. He died in November of 1928 due to radium in his hands instead of his jaw. His death wasn't in vain, as it helped the women with their case later during trials. Another company called Radium Dial Company in Ottawa, Illinois, was doing the same thing as the USRC. They hired female workers to paint the watch dials with radium and denied all of the dangerous effects of radium. They had the same technique of lip dip paint, which is licking their brush, dipping it in radium, and painting. Workers started showing symptoms of radium poisoning in 1926, so there were tests done to see how toxic radium is, but did not record the information or tell their employees. All of the workers were unaware of what was happening in New Jersey with the USRC, so they didn't know that radium paint was actively poisoning and killing them. The Radium Dial Company decided to swap out their camel hair brushes for glass pens that came to a sharp point so they wouldn't have to lick the paint. However, the pens made it more difficult for them to work efficiently, and the workers were paid by the number of dials they painted, so they went back to the brushes. The situation that was happening in New Jersey made it to the papers, and the workers were becoming concerned. So George Willis, co-founder of the USCR, told the women himself that radium was safe and they could continue working without any worry, since the women who were having issues in New Jersey were just suffering from a viral infection. No biggie, right? I mean, radium was in everything. If it was so dangerous, it wouldn't be in everything, right? Right. Grace Fryer decided to sue the USRC as she was experiencing the same symptoms as Amelia Mejia, but it took 2 years to find a lawyer who was willing to fight for their case. The women who were involved in the case were Grace Fryer, Edna Hussman, Catherine Schwab, Quinta McDonald, and Albina Larice. It was all going by slowly, and the situation had been spread all over the media, calling the women the living dead, doomed women, and dubbed them the Radium Girls. In January of 1928, their first court appearance was to take place, but by that time, 2 of the women had been so ravaged by the poisoning that they were bedridden and couldn't even lift up their arms to take an oath for the trial. The settlement for the case was $10,000 for each of the 5 women and a $600 per year annuity that would be paid to them $12 a week for the rest of their lives, along with paying for their medical and legal expenses. The USCR denied every claim thrown against them, but eventually paid them the settlement. However, all 5 women were dead by 1930. In Illinois, workers started asking for compensation by 1927, or refused by the company. They continued asking well into the mid-1930s, and his suit was brought up to the Illinois Industrial Commission. 5 women were able to find an attorney in 1937 named Leonard Grossman. He worked for them for free, as all of the women were poor, sick, and unable to pay him for his services. The hearing took place at Catherine Donahue's home, who was too sick to travel at the time, and in 1938 they won the case. It was a time for celebration for the workers, but the Radium Dial Company had shut down their factory in Ottawa, Illinois, and moved to New York. The Illinois Industrial Commission didn't want to cross state boundaries to get the money, so they were never paid, but the IIC was given a $10,000 deposit. At some point, the Radium Dial Company tried to overturn the ruling of the case, but the court denied it on October 23, 1939. When everything was finally settled by the Supreme Court, Catherine Donahue was dead, and some women never received their money. While all of this was taking place, Marie Curie had died on July 4th, 1934, at 66 years old, due to her repeated exposure to radium. She had developed aplastic pernicious anemia from the radium. Marie Curie had even said herself, "Knowledge leaves no regrets, except for radiation. I wish I never messed with that." Though this is a sad story, it has a happy ending that, unfortunately, the women who fought for their lives did not get to see. The retaliation against corrupt companies led to positive changes, such as the right of workers to sue companies for damage that was caused by labor abuse. Labor safety standards, industrial standards for safety were improved. Radium dial painters were instructed on how to protect themselves when working with radium and gave them protective gear. Workers didn't use their mouths to shape brushes and avoided inhaling radium. And in 1949, Congress passed a bill that allowed employees to get compensation from workers that were suffering from diseases that were caused or a result from their work environment. Radium paint was used in watch dials all the way into the 1970s, and the last factory that was using radium paint had closed in 1978. It was found in an autopsy that the bones of the workers are still glowing and will be for many years, as radium can last for 1,600 years before it becomes stable and ceases glowing. Eva Marie Curie's notebook is still radioactive to this day. We can only hope that the women are dancing happily in heaven as their bodies glow from love rather than radium. God rest their souls.